Hi, everyone. This is Marisa B here. Welcome to Radiant Living, Inspiring Humanity to Thrive. Today, I have with me Stephanie Minnick. Stephanie is a licensed massage therapist, a spiritual embodiment coach, and a volunteer child advocate. With over 20 years' experience, she deals mostly with issues related to childhood trauma, especially those related to sexual childhood trauma. Hi, Stephanie. Thank you so much for coming today.
Hi, Marissa. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, I'm thrilled. I know you're a busy woman, and I know that you've been doing massage work and therapy work. Trauma is it called trauma informed therapeutic massage specifically. Can you tell first of all the audience how you got started in all of this with the healing arts?
So it's it's a very long story. Started 20 years ago, and I've been a massage therapist for over 20 years now, and I went to college in Hudson, New York, actually, Columbia Green Community College, and it was a fantastic little program. And I think we give what we need, and I didn't know at the time how imperative safe touch would become throughout my adulthood, but I definitely needed that in my childhood. Um, and going into massage was it was such a blessing to me. One, to receive all of that healthy, safe, therapeutic touch, especially for my nervous system, for the things that I had been through as a child. But to also have that gift, to be able to be that person for other people and provide safe and therapeutic touch. It has completely transformed my life. I love my career. So when I first started going to college, my plan back then was to be a doula, and I wanted to work with infants, and that was very much my goal. And then I had a very traumatic experience with a friend who I was there for the birth, incredible, and her baby actually passed after 6 weeks.
Oh my
And
gosh.
that at that time in my life, I was 20 years old. I didn't have, a whole lot of experience around death, and I was very, very angry. I never wanted
Mhm.
to experience something like that with a child again, and it very much rerouted my path. Um, and I still kind of ended up dealing with death. I went back to school. In my early 20s, I was in a very abusive relationship, sexually, psychologically abusive. And I ended up going back to school, and taking out the school loans allowed me to leave that situation. But I began studying forensic anthropology, so the study of
Mhm.
bones, and also criminal profiling. And I really dove into criminal justice system, psychology, and I think that I was very much using my personal experiences around
Mhm.
trauma and abuse, and just trying to understand it in a logical way, which is fantastic and can also keep us from really feeling the depths
Mhm.
of the abuse. But I went back to school for 5 years straight, and then I graduated from that program in 2010. I had continued to do massage throughout those years,
Mhm.
and I loved my position very much, but I became very burnt out because I was not caring for myself. I was not embodied in any way. And I had really pushed through all the things that had happened, um, with overachieving, with getting more certificates, with
Mhm.
working harder, with drinking. There's so many ways that I avoided
Mhm.
what was
Dealing
really,
with things. Yeah.
yeah, what was really going on at the heart of me. And I think about the ways that I worked as a massage therapist then compared to now, and it's completely night and day. Um, and you can't really be putting your hands on people on a daily basis when you're fighting off
Mhm.
all of these personal demons and these battles. It just, that healing does not really transmit, I think, to our clients. And I took a few years off because I was starting to digest everything that had really happened, and I knew that I needed a break before I went into grad school. And my father then passed. He passed in 2010.
Oh, I'm sorry to
Um,
hear that.
thank
That's a
you.
drama in and of itself
It,
when a parent passes. Yes.
It's huge, and it really makes you come face to face with your own
Hmm.
mortality. And like I said, I had graduated early that year, and I was just very much in limbo. I was engaging in a lot of things that didn't have boundaries, that were self-destructive. I was very
Hmm.
self-destructive, but I was also very high achieving. So people don't see the self-destructive part
Right.
of it, I think. And they see you being really strong, so they're not really checking in like, hey, are you okay?
Right. Like what's
Um,
going on behind the scenes, right? Because you're high
yes.
achieving and you're doing, yes. And that's what they see. They see the
Yeah.
accomplishments.
Yep. And I was, accomplishment validation queen. Like I needed that reinforcement from others. And when my father passed, it really just kind of put a halt to everything. It catapulted me into my healing in a way that I don't think anybody is ready for, but it
Hmm.
was also around, now I understand, it was around my Saturn return. And if you know anything about astrology, our Saturn return starts sometimes around 28, 29. It goes into our early 30s. And it is very much a disillusion of our previous self. It's, you think about the ways our family, our environment,
Hmm.
culture puts on us who we are.
Yes, indeed. It
At the end of
does.
your 20s, you get, with the Saturn return, you get an opportunity to really reevaluate that. Saturn is about difficult lessons and perseverance. It's about structure and boundaries. And
I find this fascinating. I
oh,
always tell everybody I did a course many, many years ago on astrology because I know a number of people that are really good at it. And I did this course, and I'm lucky I realized cardinal after all those 10 or 12 weeks. It's so complicated to me, but I find it fascinating. And I always love, like you're explaining about the Saturn return, like I would have never known that. I mean, that's a little bit more in depth than the course I took. Needless to say, come out of the course and really don't know anything still.
well, it's a lot. It's a lot to digest. And I'm a natural researcher. I crave why. I want to know why for a lot of
Mm.
things. And a lot of it I think has to do with my trauma. And then it also just kind of has to do with, my curiosity as a person. But now looking back at that, I was like, oh my gosh. Like, and I was in 2010, I was just in the beginning stages of what was leading to my rock bottom,
Mhm.
and I didn't even know what was coming. Poor little thing. When my dad passed, again, he was only 60.
He
And
was
there
young.
had been a lot of abuse in my home. My father had a traumatic brain injury, which I now understand so much more
Hmm.
about. But I didn't know at that time. So losing a parent when there has been abuse in the home,
Hmm.
um, being being abused or experiencing abuse from a parent is so it's damaging on so many levels, but it intertwines love and abuse. So you end up
Well,
in abusive
right.
relationships, and you think they love me, and you don't understand how to make that dissection. And there's so much extra grief
Hmm.
and guilt when a parent passes in that way, because you're battling these demons of
Hmm.
wanting to have compassion because this is your parent, angry because what they've done
Hmm.
to you, how it's impacted your life. So there was just a lot of stuff that was dredged up for me. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's only 60. Most people in my family, because of genetics
Hmm.
and bad environments, they do pass around early 60s. So
And that's
for
so young. I mean, that's so very young.
so young, on the precipice of 30, I was like, oh my God, my life is half
Hmm.
over.
Hmm.
What if my life is really half over? What am I doing with myself?
Hmm.
I'm drinking myself into oblivion. Um, I'm engaging in toxic relationships. I did not know how to say no. I didn't know how to speak up for myself. I didn't know how to extricate myself from the situation I'd gotten in, because the the workplace, I had been there for about 8 years. I didn't know anybody outside of my workplace. I lived with people I worked with.
Oh,
I
wow.
people I worked with. I was having relationships with people
Hmm.
I worked with. So there was just
Right. No boundaries at all. Right. Yeah.
no boundaries. And it's so, like, looking back at that, knowing that that was my Saturn return, um, Saturn is about boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought a one-way ticket to Hawaii. I got rid of everything that I owned within like a week and bought a one-way ticket to Hawaii. I'm
Wow.
going out there to look at grad school because they had some programs that I was very deeply um, curious about. That's what I wanted to do. Hawaii did not work out. I was out there for a couple of months. I got
Mm-hmm.
in some really dangerous situations, and I ended up actually sleeping in a rental car, like outside of a Walgreens. And I again had that ego death of how badly do I want this piece of paper? What is this achievement worth?
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth my safety? Because I was really struggling with finding a safe environment to even live in. And I was like, you can go to school back on,
Mm-hmm.
on the mainland where you have a little bit more safety. And that was really hard for me. It felt like such a failure of self. So having to come to terms with having achieved this thing, but it didn't end up the way that I wanted it
Mm-hmm.
to, and having to revisit what it means to actually fail, what it means to succeed, what it means to be safe, all of those things, who I was. I very much was reinvestigating who I was at that
Mm-hmm.
time because I wasn't a massage therapist anymore. I wasn't working. The title that had defined me for 10 years was gone. I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have a vehicle. I didn't have a place to live. So everything was gone. And I had to get very deep around those demons and that dark time in my life, and ended up coming back to the Asheville area. um went through a couple other ego death things.
Mm-hmm.
I went to grad schools, all that stuff. And I ended up going back to New York to stay with family, and that was also the beginning of deep
The
deep
eye-opening events. The
it's
eye-opening
so
events.
crazy to retell this now, but it was such a long and winding path to why I'm
Mm-hmm.
here, and it's why I do things the way that I do and the way that I do. So I did go back home and I stayed with family, and again I grew up with a lot of abuse
Mm-hmm.
in my home environment. There was a lot of neglect and coldness from my mother, abuse from my father, who was abusive towards my brother and my mom, but not me. So then there's that added layer of
Mm-hmm. Guilt.
guilt and also anger. And do I have the right to have
Mm-hmm.
that anger because it wasn't on me? I mean, so many
Mm-hmm.
different things. So I was there for a couple of years, and I was unemployed for 2.5 years in a very small area. I didn't have a car. So just trying to honestly keep myself alive. I was
Mm-hmm.
in a very, very dark place, and I had running shoes and I had a library card. And I'll tell you what, those things saved my life
Mm-hmm.
because I went running in the morning. I'm not a
Into the
runner.
library. Right.
I went running in the evening. I went to the library. I would spend 6 or 7 hours a day applying
Mm-hmm.
for jobs. And I started watching Super Soul Sunday. My aunt had cable, and I started watching Super Soul Sunday and listening to these stories
Mm-hmm.
of actors and actresses, and just hearing about what they'd been through in their lives. And I would go to the library and take out their
Mm-hmm.
books and do more research around this. So it was very deep in the shadow work stuff then, and went through another very abusive relationship in my 30s, and that was the one that broke me. That was the one that I decided I'm the common denominator here. Like there's
Yeah.
these certain types of men that I tend to attract. Like I have a sign on me that says "fix me" or something. The compassionate person in me,
Mm-hmm.
wanting other people to not hurt. I was very much overextending myself in dangerous ways, physically and
Helping
psychologically.
everyone, right? Helping everyone, trying to make them see the good in themselves.
Yeah, and I think that I know now that I did that in further attempt to not deal with my own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it was that
Or
relationship that,
also maybe often salvage what you wanted to salvage in your family, right? Because a lot of children
yes,
feel like the caretaker and they want to
yes.
fix everything.
And I thank you for bringing that up, because it is such an important part of understanding how we get into these relationships later on. If you do have a parent that's engaging in drug use, which there was always drug use in my home, and you have taken on that role of caretaker, which as the eldest sibling I did, I was,
Mm-hmm.
caring for both
The
of my younger
parent,
siblings.
parentified, yeah, parentified in the household.
And yeah, so I very much took on that role. And there's also just very deep mother wounding in my story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I've talked to so many women about this, and when you have a disconnect from your mother, when you do not feel loved or valued by your mother, it sets this tone for everything
Mm-hmm.
else. Because if she doesn't want me, then something must be wrong, because what kind of mother doesn't love and care for her child, so then you're
Mm-hmm.
seeking out this validation
And
from
it's such a
men.
difficult. First of all, let's preface this by saying that this is a lot of deep work that one does. One does not get over this in a week or a month. This is a
No.
lot of work through years to
Yeah,
overcome a lot of things, that we have to say. So bravo to you, because this is
thank you.
much work. The second thing is it's so difficult, because for a child, a bad mother is better than no mother. I worked with
Yes.
social services for years when I was working on my first master's, and I can tell you that a child will scream and rant and rave if you try to take that child away from even an abusive mother, because that's their mother, and love and bonding is there in whatever form it is. But as an outsider looking in, it's much easier to understand the plight of the parent. I don't think that a child can understand that, even an adult child. It's difficult to go back and say, well, she behaved that way because of her circumstances, or because of what happened to her, or what was perpetrated upon her. It's very difficult. I can say that as the outsider, understand, not make excuses, but comprehend
Mm-hmm.
what took place, why that individual might be detached or downtrodden from their background. But the child, even the adult child, very difficult. Don't you find it's very difficult to try to
It's
overcome that?
it's so it's so difficult. And anybody that listens to this or watches this, yes, I just want to reiterate, I have been doing this work on myself for years.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been podcasts and books and listening to people's stories. And it's a cycle. It's
Mm-hmm.
repeated forgiveness. It is not a one and done.
No.
And I find that, in my story, so many things you think, okay, I've dealt with this, I've worked on this, and then
Mm-hmm.
a year or two later,
Comes
somebody
back.
else comes in, and it lets you again address this issue of self-love, of validation, of no boundaries, from another level of
Mm-hmm.
awareness and consciousness. And I think that a lot of times people get caught up in that healing mentality of like, I have to just do this work here.
Right. I'm
No,
healed. I'm
it
right. I've
it
done X
is
amount of work and I'm healed.
it is a continuous thing. And it doesn't mean that you failed. It means you're
Right.
getting another opportunity from more awareness, from more compassion, from deeper consciousness to address these types of issues. And I think you have the ability to look at how you've grown. And I mean, 5 years ago, I could not have these conversations around,
Mm-hmm.
my parents' stuff. But so much has happened in the past 5 or 6 years. Um, and I just want to give a little trigger warning if anybody's listening to this. I am going to talk a little bit about suicide. Um, I deal with sexual trauma and rape, and because of my own experiences. So I will be talking about a lot of, deeper
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But yeah, I ended up going to therapy for that particular relationship. It did uncover some other things, because of what I experienced in my home with the detriment of pharmaceuticals. I was very against being put on medication. and I did try a few different therapists. They all wanted to put me on medication. I understand from their perspective, but I was just like, I don't think that's the way. I don't think that I'm broken and need to be medicated. I think I need to understand what has happened to me so I can not repeat those patterns. And just for
because
context,
medication often masks symptoms. It doesn't
numbs.
really address symptoms that
It numbs.
occur.
And
you
my
want to find out
brother-
why the symptoms have manifested themselves. That's really the crux of it.
I'm very much about getting down to the root of something and ripping that sucker up and planting something new. You know, we can't just snip it at the top and think that it's not going to grow back. It is. We have to spend years repatterning these beliefs that we have about ourselves, these narratives, and then our behaviors and our actions. You know, we are constantly being invited to use that knowledge. And we don't always do it right. And then there is forgiveness for self and just having grace, you know. So there's so many different components of healing. And my brother is 4 years younger. My sister's 12 years younger. My brother was medicated at 4 years old in 1990 before meds were even a thing. He was put on Ritalin at 4 years old. And I wasn't really a supporter of it as a child because I was like, there are so many other things going on in our home. Like my mom would kind of drag us to therapy, and I was just terrible to the counselor because I was like, I'm not the problem here. My father's the problem. Why are we sitting here? You know what I mean? Kind of thing.
Yeah, there's anger, hostility, right?
Like angry with my mom, like, why are you lying? Like, kind of thing. So, so my brother he continued to be medicated throughout his very young life. And that does not give a developing brain an opportunity to understand how to act behaviorally. And he's also being physically abused. I found out later that he had been sexually abused.
Oh my gosh.
So he went through so much as a child. And that was, you know, seeing what he went through pharmacologically and with the lack of investigation from professionals, and also just seeing the mental health instability in my family, especially from my mother's side. I was like, I'll drink my cares away, but I am not going to be getting into medication very deeply. I did abuse substances. I abused marijuana. I abused pills in a recreational way, but not in any capacity therapeutic way. So I have that like weird mindset around I was okay with doing it like this, but not like this.
Right.
And I understand that now. So I had tried several different therapists, didn't want to be on medication. And because I have the background in massage, you know, I have been entered into the therapeutic realms and alternative modalities. And I know that there's so much more out there. And that knowledge alone allowed me to investigate things that most people probably are not even aware of, would not be open
that
to.
anything's out there, right? Because you go to a professional, someone you believe is a professional, you believe they have the experience, they have the formal education, they have the know-how, and they tell you, take these pills. How many people actually take those pills? Many of them do. And then they don't even look anywhere. They don't know that they don't, number one, they don't know they have the right to look anywhere, right? Because oftentimes they're broken, they're shattered. They don't realize that they actually have the right to say that I have the right to be healed. I have the right to live a wonderful life. I have the right to have joy and peace and love in my life. And they don't know that. So the professional says, take this or take these, and then you're off to the races, and you're really not dealing with anything other than being on medication. I mean, there is talk therapy. As a therapist myself, many of my clients say that talk therapy for them was just not enough. It just was not enough. And movement, art, you know, the creative aspect, in addition to talking, but they needed much more to start the healing process. Yeah.
Well, and I'm glad that you bring that up, because in my figuring out crafty ways to help myself just get through the day. I did start learning more around trauma, and that's the thing, is trauma lives in our body. Trauma
Yes.
lives in our body, in our nervous system. So, these behaviors that we've been practicing for 20, 30 years,
Mhm.
you do not just change them overnight. You do not just change these narratives around your worth overnight. It is a constant um, fueling, and then there's also, like, we have to rest. We have to give ourselves some grace
Right.
and not be constantly trying to improve or heal. So it is a very delicate balance. And I, also as a massage therapist for 20 years, I've seen so many clients. I cannot tell you the times that I've seen clients that I was able to help
Mhm.
just with some information. And they say, my doctor didn't tell me that. My
Right.
doctor didn't tell me that. They want to do surgery. They want to put me on this med. They want to do this. And
Mhm.
it was so frustrating as a therapist to see people's bodies damage from
Mhm.
surgery that was likely
Mhm.
unnecessary, and to see people suffering again needlessly because they're not really getting to the root of the problem. So I
Mhm.
had all of these experiences through my personal life, through my professional life, and then I became a child advocate in the courtroom. So
Mhm.
working with social workers, working with attorneys, and that really that really forced me to advocate for myself. And because I was advocating for others, it helped me learn how to be assertive and direct and have
Mhm.
boundaries and not take on everybody else's stuff as my own, because it is one of the most emotional things I've ever committed to in my life. It is horrific to see the things, I know, that people allow
Mhm.
their children to go through. And my perspective as a volunteer, um, I know that so many people that are coming in there with their kids in the system, I know that they've been failed by our systems. I know that. I know it's a continuous, people falling through the cracks because of our broken medical
Mhm.
system, because of our broken justice system. I know that
Right.
it's not just that easy to get over your stuff and move on.
No,
And
not at
I and
all.
I I learned that, I learned that the hard way with my brother, because I got away from my family. I got out of there at 17, and I've been away for 25 years, and I have been working on myself continuously for
Mhm.
the past 11 at the very least.
Mhm.
And I just now feel like I'm in a space where my narratives are different, my behaviors are different, the way I approach things is different. I'm not that girl anymore. That's a long time to be working to shed those layers. And something that I really struggled with in my relationship with my brother before I understood
Mhm.
trauma, I was just like, get your stuff together, get it together. We grew up in the same
Mhm.
household, and that
Easier said than done, though. You
it's
see, easier said than
very,
done for some people.
it's, it's so much easier said than done. And I share this because, um, when my brother died, I went through immense amounts of guilt and shame,
Guilt.
and I know that there are other people out there um,
Mhm.
that have also experienced this with their siblings.
And are going
I
through it
know,
now. Yes, and are going through it now. Yes. But
and I think
you can't save someone else. You can only save yourself.
it is a very difficult lesson. It's a very difficult lesson to learn,
Mhm.
and I don't think that I don't even know if I had the capacity to show my compassion in a way that would reach him, because I always had the mentality of like, pull yourself together and kind of get on with it. And I've been admonished by my sister, my youngest sibling,
Mhm.
about that mentality. But I said, as a child, there was not an adult to show me the way, to guide me, to save me, to protect me.
Mhm.
I was
You had to do it
that
yourself.
person for my siblings.
Mhm.
So there wasn't time to cry about it. There wasn't time to worry about my feelings or anything. There was like, you do this and you get it done because this is what needs to be done and nobody else is doing it. And so the struggle between, my brother and we ultimately were, kind of out of touch, really, really only in touch here and there. And in December 29th of 2017, I got a call from my younger sister, and my brother had been in a horrific car crash, and nothing about it set right with me. We were told it was an accident, but I went to the scene of the accident. I saw the vehicle. I talked to a lot of people about his behavior that day, and it just did not sit right with me that it was an accident. I immediately thought this was purposeful. This was purposeful. He came around a bend and he hit a dump truck full of rock salt with 50,000 pounds
Wow.
of rock salt. And I mean,
Oh my
they
God,
had
what a
to
shame.
actually reconcrete the road because of, it broke the road up. So that happened 2 weeks before I started my volunteer work as a guardian ad litem. So I'm sitting in these classes 2 nights a week talking about childhood trauma, talking about abuse, talking about neglect. I'd also just started a job as a nanny, and I was having to care for this little girl who was about 2 years old. She was very similar to what I must have been like as a child. And I was with her for about 50 hours a week. So all of that, I don't even know how I got out of that chapter of my life. I ping ponged between drinking very heavily and crying on the bathroom floor and committing to the responsibilities that I had set up for myself, kind of thing. And the grief and shame that I experienced in that first year alone, the things that the fights that we'd had, the things that I'd said to him, all of that. And also just that internal conflict of I don't believe what I'm being told. I just don't feel like this is right. And I've always been a deeply spiritual person. My brother's death is what really catapulted me into that trusting of self and trusting that inner voice, trusting my spiritual senses. And I would talk to him and ask him, like, what were you doing? Were you on your phone? What happened? And I just would always get this like, you don't need to know kind of thing. And fast forward 3
How old
years.
was he? How old was he when he passed away?
He was 32.
32. My gosh, he was so young.
Yeah, very, very young. Very, very young. And he had taken himself off all of his medications. I believe for some time before that. And he was deeply invested in an AA program. So he was sober the night that this happened. And I think that that's where he found his voice. I think that that's where he felt like he had some validation and he had some support, within this group environment. And we had mended things. I live in North Carolina. They lived in New York. So I didn't see him often. We talked very, very sporadically on the phone. I did see him a few times before we left New York because I had been living there. He came to my wedding. One of my deepest regrets, I will say, for anybody out there that's struggling just with darkness and demons, and one of my deepest regrets is that at my wedding, he really wanted to dance with me. And I didn't take that time. So looking back at that, that's something I have to carry for the rest of my life. Sorry.
Well, but you have to think it was your wedding. You could have been
everywhere
with thoughts elsewhere because of having to, be the host, really, even though your wedding, it's your wedding, but you're the host, so there are things that do play
Thank
into
you.
that.
Yeah. And so 3 years into grieving his death, I actually reconnected with the woman that he was dating at the time. And he had blocked her on social media, which is why I
Mhm.
hadn't been able to connect with her. I'd heard about her.
Mhm.
Um, anyway, we connected and she told me what had been going on in the relationship. They'd gotten in a fight the day before. He blocked
Mhm.
her on social media. She sent me messages about him talking about suicide. He'd been talking about suicide
Mhm.
for months. And that was for me almost a relieving conversation because up until that point, I had thought maybe I was crazy for the things that I was thinking. But my background in forensics and all this stuff, I was just
Mhm.
like, doesn't make sense. And after that day, ever since when I've asked him, I can just feel that like, now you know.
Mhm.
Now you know, you weren't ready to know before. Now you know. And I've had many spiritual sessions with ancestral healing
Mhm.
channelers and stuff like that that have all supported that knowing. So my brother's experience very much propelled me forward in wanting to provide
Mhm.
guidance for people outside of medication and helping them understand like the many different paths to
Mhm.
healing. And I've in our small community, we've had a lot of suicides. And my husband,
Mhm.
actually,
Wow.
his sister, she died by suicide when she was
Oh
17.
wow.
And
What a
in
shame. So
my
young again.
so young, and in my turmoil when I was 15, I would go to her grave and like use her in a
Mhm.
sense of like, look what this has done to our
Mhm.
community. People that you don't even know, are in grief
Mhm.
over this. And I always thought about her. I thought about her parents, and I thought about who the man who would become my husband.
Mhm.
Um, and when I was in New York, he and I had reconnected. We were apart for 17 years and reconnected through friends. We were hanging out with the same
Mhm.
people in the same house, missing each other just by a few hours for about 2 years. And, so that divine timing of bringing us back together,
Mhm.
um, very healing. I also had spiritual connections with his sister. So
Mhm.
between that and my brother's experience and the other things that have kind of happened throughout my life, I have been very investigative of all the other stuff that's out there that
Mhm.
we're not really told about. All of our capacities to tune into this, to
Yes.
channel things, and to be of service
Mhm.
for others in that capacity that are laughed at, that are stigmatized, that are written off.
Mhm.
And because of my unwillingness to really be medicated all the time and to be constantly in therapy, um there's so many things, that
Mhm.
I've dove into. I have also, I've done a lot of energetic work. I've done a
Yes.
lot of Reiki. I can say I've been a massage therapist for 20 years, and Reiki is one of the most
Mhm.
transformative, powerful, and unexplainable experiences
Right. It
I've
is.
ever had. I mean, it is just uncanny feeling those weights leave your
Yes.
body. It's a really, really beautiful thing. I have investigated shamanic journeying with
Mhm.
psilocybin. That has allowed me to really tap into a deeper level of compassion for myself, for
Mhm.
the things that I've been through, and for other people, and seeing them in the light of childhood, of what they
Mhm.
brought into their adulthood and didn't have somebody to teach them how to alchemize this. And it's not a justification or an excuse for what they've done as a parent, or you know but it is a way to give myself some
Mhm.
peace, instead of carrying all of those things. So after after my brother's death, my mother obviously was just I mean, beside herself. And I tried to help her
Mhm.
in an alternative and therapeutic way, and that was not the route that she wanted to take. So she began medicate. Her doctor began medicating her at a very heavy dose. They have not taken her off, so she is pretty much gone. Um, so my father and brother are gone. I do not have relation with my sister, my aunt, or my mother because
Mhm.
of the trauma, because of the betrayal, because of just needing to shore up my boundaries so that my
Mhm.
sanity and my physical health stay intact. But with that experience, I started diving much deeper into trauma. How can
Mhm.
we help people? How can we understand this so that another sibling can have a more compassionate relationship,
Mhm.
and they can have some understanding? I would never wish what I went through on my worst enemy.
Mhm.
Um, you know, so and also, how can people better understand what their parents have been through so that they can go
Right.
healing, or what are some things that we can try before we try heavy medication
Mhm.
kind of thing. And I actually reached out to a local doctor who he works with healing traumatic brain injuries
Mhm.
from a natural and holistic standpoint. So I went in to talk to him about neuroplasticity and how that
Mhm.
could play a role in a coaching
Right.
program. And he hired me on the spot. So, and I wasn't looking for a job, but I thought, okay. And that experience was where I really began to understand
Mhm.
what traumatic brain injury does
Mhm.
and how it does lead to aggression, mental health issues,
Mhm.
abuse, addiction. And it really opened my eyes to what my father had been through and how he behaved.
Mhm.
Again, not justification for what he'd done, but finding compassion,
Mhm.
for that. And it also really shed so much light on what my brother went through and why he couldn't just get over it and just move on, from these things. So it was a really beautiful unfolding for me
Mhm.
to just deepen my forgiveness, deepen my compassion, all of those things. And then, taking that information um into my own practice. And so I after that, I did start coaching online about 3 years ago. I
Mhm.
actually opened my business the same week that COVID shut the country
Oh,
down.
wow.
Uh, I don't even have a reason to get out of bed right now. But it
But
was
ironically, you must have been busy because people were suffering
it
and still
was
are.
yeah, and honestly, I have worked with a minimal amount of clients, but they
Mhm.
have been so aligned, and it was truly
Mhm.
the way that I wanted to work with people. And that time also gave me um time to dive deeper into my
Mhm.
own nervous system healing and be applying all of these different things that I had been learning. It allowed me to very much come into my body in a safe way. And and then I started thinking about, how would I want to kind of put this into the world. and
Mhm.
and I decided I really, really wanted to go back to massage. Massage is such a beautiful way to connect with our
Mhm.
intuition. It is a beautiful way to connect with our voice. And it massage helped me build boundaries. It helped me build body
Mhm.
boundaries. And being able to speak up on the table allows me to more effectively speak up out
Mhm.
in my life, in my relationship. So I really try to help my clients understand that massage is so much more than just tissue
Right.
manipulation,
Just massage. Right.
and help them understand how to kind of connect the dots between this terrible thing happened. I'm feeling this pain
Mhm.
in my shoulder. This is what's coming up during the massage. How do I address this? So I always follow up with my clients with tons of information,
Mhm.
books or podcasts, things that they can look into, because I want them to feel empowered. I want them
Mhm.
to have that education. When we do not have all of the different, paths to
Right.
healing, it's a disservice to us and the world. And I think that so many people just don't know that there are a lot of different things that they can try, that are therapeutic, that yes are time investments, but that's what healing
Right.
is. It is a devotion to self.
And
It
right, and you're
is,
worth it, and you're worth it, and that's how it goes, right? I mean, you're
and
worth
that
it.
is honestly, that is also how you change those narratives. That
Yes.
change those narratives around I deserve to be touched in a therapeutic and
Hmm.
safe way. I deserve to rest for an hour and let
Hmm.
somebody else work on me. I deserve to
Hmm.
receive. I
Hmm.
deserve to receive goodness
Right.
and feel good in my body. I love just being that facilitator for my clients, for them to understand, like, oh, it feels good. It
Yes.
feels good to be in my body, because so many people, they know on a regular basis what it feels like to be
Right.
stressed, to be
Right.
angry, to be upset, to be hiding and stuffing things down. And being that person that can help them
Hmm.
peel back the layers and start to feel better in their skin. Because sexual trauma and grief,
Yes.
that guilt, that shame, it blocks our voice. We
Right.
stifle our voice. It impacts us physiologically. It creates inflammation in the body, which is the root of
Right.
all
Of all
physical
the
and mental
issues.
health
Yes.
issues. So helping people understand that self-care is the path to self-advocacy
Hmm.
is my goal. And I do work with some men, but I primarily see
Hmm.
women. And my practice opened in March, and since then I've also started integrating astrology into my practice. And I'm doing this from the perspective of goddess astrology,
Hmm.
goddess asteroids in our
Oh, that's
natal chart.
wonderful.
And
Oh, you'll have
the
to come
way
on and do another talk on that. You'll have to definitely come on and let the audience know about that, because that, right, that's a conversation for another day. That's a huge,
okay,
that's a whole
yes,
other area, and that's wonderful. I
I
mean, and it's really kind of in depth because it's astrology, but goddess astrology. That's a wonderful conversation to have as well.
I would love that, because and I fell into that during COVID, around the silencing
Mm.
of natural healers, the silencing of alternative health
Right.
practitioners, and correlating that with the witch wounds
Yes.
and the way that women silence, the way that we
Hmm.
self-silence out of fear. And no one does that more than somebody who's had sexual trauma. So helping women specifically come back to their bodies,
Hmm.
come back to their voice, and be able to just stand up for themselves, is that's that's my goal with massage.
Well, I want to, I mean, we could talk on and on about this, right? I mean, hours and hours, right? Because it's such in-depth conversation, and many people need to hear it to heal, to begin their healing process. But I
Yeah.
do want to thank you so much for coming on today, taking the time to speak to the audience, especially about these personal, uh, powerful issues, and now how you're helping others. And definitely, I will have to have you on in the new year. Just
Yes.
the goddess astrology alone is a conversation for another day that we could get a little bit more in depth with. But
I would love.
again, Stephanie, thank you so much. Hopefully, we'll be able to work together in the new year, and have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You take care.
I will see you soon.
Bye.